All right, I think let's kick off the session. So welcome everyone. Thank you for everyone who's joined us so far today. So we're here today for the first part of our two-part workshop on gender equality in global markets. So as we start, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat and let us know where you're joining from. But we've got a packed schedule to cover today, so we'll be getting started now. So thank you firstly to the Philippine Stock Exchange for hosting us for today's session. It's truly great to be back working together again. And this program really is a very collaborative effort between the IFC, UN Women, Columbia University, and with support from the Luxembourg government. So lots of different organizations involved in making this possible. So a big thank you to all of them. And of course, a thank you to everyone who's taken the time out to join us at this training session as well. So to get us started, we're going to kick off with a few opening remarks. So firstly, I'm very pleased to introduce the President and CEO of the Philippine Stock Exchange, Mr. Ramon S. Monzon, who'll be giving a brief opening to the session from PSE. So many thanks again, Mr. Monzon, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to our workshop on gender equality in global capital markets. As a signatory to the Women's Empowerment Principles, the Philippine Stock Exchange has partnered with the UNSSE to organize this webinar to educate the public on the principles of gender equality and how they relate to the global capital markets. According to UN Women, gender equality is not only a fundamental human right, but a necessary foundation for a peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable world. At its very core, gender equality pertains to fairness and equal opportunity to all genders. In today's business landscape, however, corporations may find gender equality to be a complex and at times subjective issue. It is for this reason that we are providing capacity building programs to simplify the principles of gender equality, help companies in their strategic planning, and take advantage of opportunities linked to gender equality. Listed companies have made significant strides in terms of integrating gender equality. In the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report of 2024, the Philippines ranked 25th out of 146 participating countries. This report assesses companies across 4 gender-focused key areas: economic participation and opportunity, educational attainment, health and survival, and political empowerment. This ranking can be attributed to the fact that several listed companies in the Philippines have policies on gender diversity in the board and management, as well as policies prohibiting all forms of workplace discrimination, all with the goal to increase representation and dignity of women in the workplace. These companies acknowledge the importance and contributions of women in the workforce, leading to increased employee retention rates, and most importantly, a safe and healthy working environment. Our resource persons this afternoon will present principles on gender equality, as well as real-world examples applying those principles. It is our hope that you will apply these learnings to your own workplace and influence change in your respective organizations. The training is structured around the UNSSE's 4 key modules: prepare, align, implement, and communicate, all of which will be made clearer later on. I extend my appreciation to the UN Sustainable Stock Exchanges Initiative, the International Finance Corporation, and UN Women for helping in the organization of this workshop. I call on all our stakeholders, including our participants this afternoon, to join us in creating a truly gender-equal economy that is beneficial to all individuals. Thank you, and I wish you all a productive session.
Many thanks, Mr. Monzon, for that great context setting, and a pleasure to be here with you again. So thank you very much for opening the session for us. So I'm pleased also to say we have a second opening today, which will be coming from Kate Lazarus, who's the Senior ESG Advisory Lead for the Asia Pacific region with the IFC, part of the World Bank Group. So many thanks as well, Kate, and over to you.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much, and warm welcome to all the participants. So I'm really happy to be here to welcome you to the Gender Equality and Capital Markets Workshop. And let me begin by thanking, of course, the United Nations Sustainable Stock Exchanges and UN Women for the collaboration with IFC, the private sector arm of the World Bank Group, to deliver these remarks, and also to extend my appreciation to Mr. Mozon and the Philippines Stock Exchange for hosting this important event. So at IFC, advancing equal opportunity and inclusive leadership for both women and men is not just a priority, it's really central to our development mandate across the region and globally. And we're proud to partner with stock exchanges and global stakeholders to promote equitable participation and representation of women across capital markets and beyond. And this commitment aligns closely with the World Bank Group's Gender Strategy 2024 to 2030, which focuses on accelerating women's empowerment as a pathway to end poverty and build a livable planet. And the strategy prioritizes three key objectives: ending gender-based violence and investing in human capital, expanding economic opportunities, and promoting women's leadership. And so by leveraging innovation, financing, and collective action, the strategy aims to drive systemic change and deliver measurable outcomes that benefit individuals, communities, and economies. So why does this matter? Because the business case for advancing women's participation and inclusive leadership is stronger than ever. And it's essential for building more resilient, competitive, and inclusive economies. Research covering nearly 2,000 listed companies show that a 1% increase in female managers correlates with a 0.5% decrease in CO2 emissions, highlighting how inclusive leadership contributes to a climate-smart future. And companies with more women in leadership also tend to demonstrate stronger commitment to inclusive growth, stakeholder engagement, and overall sustainability. So from companies and investors to policymakers and stock exchanges, we all have a role shaping inclusive and resilient markets. And evidence, including IFC research, consistently shows that stronger environmental, social, and governance, ESG, practices are linked to better business performance and leadership that brings a range of perspectives, playing a critical role in driving these outcomes. Yet despite these benefits, women remain underrepresented, particularly at the board level and in senior and middle management, and progress continuously remains slow. To truly move the needle, we need the full and equal participation of everyone. Globally at IFC, we've launched the Inclusive Leadership for Company Sustainability, ILCS, training program, which we've been delivering around the world for several years, which is also supported by the government of Luxembourg. And just 2 months ago, with support from the Swiss government through SECO and the European Union through Access, we held a week-long training of trainers program in Jakarta for market intermediaries to boost their capacity and roll out engagement in the region with stock exchanges, financial institutions, and corporates to boost their skills in improving diversity at board levels and addressing issues of gender-based violence and climate governance. This was led and implemented through IFC's ESG advisory program in Asia Pacific, which operates across the region and provides important guidance, advice, and capacity to the private sector, regulators, and stock exchanges. For instance, IFC is training boards of directors on the governance of gender-based violence and harassment, which means enabling boards of directors to have the skills and knowledge to combat GBVH in companies and their operations. And we conduct important gap analysis and assessments on ESG, including gender, and help is here if you need it. In 2023, the UNSSC, IFC, and UN Women published the Market Monitor on Gender Equality, which I note will be shared in more detail during this training. And it provides important data and information on the status of Asia Pacific stock exchanges, including PSE, and where they stand with regards to, percentage of board seats held by women, the percentage of firms with at least 30% on boards, percentage of firms with all male boards, and so forth. And comparatively, PSE is faring well against peers in the Southeast Asia region. Now, our trainings and data underpin the important information and capacity that's needed in the region, and opportunities such as these where we can have peer learning platforms are important because we can provide opportunity to get more women onboarded with these issues as well as men, and also to further more women in non-traditional roles, such as the work that's being done in the Philippines, particularly in the power sector, where there's great opportunities to boost women's skills development and have more women in management and board level positions. IFC's program in the Philippines emphasizes green, resilient, and inclusive growth. And we've worked with the central bank and financial institutions, for example, on the 30 by 30 Zero initiative to support broader renewable energy, energy efficiency, water, and agricultural development in the country, and also made landmark investments focusing on providing or expanding access to finance for women in the Philippines by investing in social bonds, directing loans for low and lower middle income women, and financing women-owned businesses. As mentioned above, this is really about elevating women into key roles where they can, direct the outcomes and strengthen corporate sustainability. IFC is also EDGE gender certified and began our recertification process in 2024. Over a decade ago, only 20% of IFC's nominee directors were women. And today that figure has risen to well over 50%, thanks to sustained action. So I'm really happy that we're partnering here with UNSSE and UN Women and stock exchanges, really to harness all of your roles in the power of capital markets and advancing women's leadership. And this 2-day workshop will really guide all of US participants on the complexities of advancing inclusive participation of women and how to do it, the why of it, the how, and the where. And IFC is very proud to support these efforts, and we look forward to continuing to collaborate in the Philippines and beyond. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Kate, for setting the scene so well for us there. And as ever, we're very grateful for the collaboration with IFC on this topic as well. So many thanks for being here with us today. Okay, fantastic. So I think we've set the scene very well there on the context in the Philippines and the region and, some of the imperative for why to act. But we'll be diving in now really to a bit of the detail on the training program itself. So as many of you probably already feel, gender equality and finance can be both sensitive as well as complex topics. So rather than pretending that complexity doesn't exist, what we're aiming to do today is to better understand it and identify what we need to do to move forward. So just to cover some housekeeping, as you're probably aware, this is a 2-part training program. We have a 2-hour session today, and we'll follow up with a second 2-part training on Friday of another 2 hours. You'll have the opportunity to ask your questions throughout the training today. So please make use of the Q&A box within the Zoom functionality if you've got any questions for the team, and we'll do our best to answer those. We've also got several opportunities for participation throughout the session, so we'd encourage you to get involved in those as well. And finally, if you take part in both parts of the program this week, you'll be able to receive a completion certificate after the end of Friday's session. So we'll share some information about how to access that, which will require you to complete a survey. So we'll tell you more about that on Friday. And just to cover off a few Zoom functionality features. So as you've probably noted, you're on mute, but please do make sure you're using the chat and Q&A options to interact with the session. So please use the chat for any general comments or questions, general comments, and then the questions, please put into the Q&A box. This just allows us to keep track of the questions and make sure that we provide you with a clear answer. So just to say a little bit about who's joining you today for the training. So I'm Fiona from the UNSSE team, and I'm joined by my colleague Landon as well. And we're very pleased to be joined today by Tony Santos, who is a program analyst with the Gender Action Lab for UN Women based in the Philippines as well. And Tony will be talking to us later about the work of the UN Women, including the Women's Empowerment Principles. We'll also have a guest speaker who's joining us towards the end of the training session, who's Harry Agomba from Bloomberg. And Harry will be talking to us about gender indices and gender scoring. So as we've already said, gender equality is a complex topic, and it is something that we need to see as such. So to help us break down this complexity, we've developed a 4-part structure, as my colleagues have very kindly already introduced to you earlier in the session. So we'll be working through today these 4 modules of prepare, align, implement, and communicate. So our first training today is really focusing on the first 2 aspects of prepare and align. So all around understanding what gender equality is, why it's important, and providing an overview of the main standards and guidelines that can be used to guide performance. And our second part on Friday will dig into the action, so with the second 2 steps, all around implementation and communication. So for that purpose, we have several training learning objectives for today's session in particular. So firstly, we'd like to help you to understand why action is needed for enhanced gender equality. And we'd also like to help you to identify what tools can be used to improve gender equality. So those are our focus objectives for today's session. And to cover that, we'll have an agenda as follows. So we'll break up the 2 modules across the 2 halves of the section, and we'll take a short break in the middle as well, just to refresh ourselves. So to get us started, we've got a first Menti exercise, just to get used to using Menti and to get a sense of how much you already know on the topic. So my colleague Landon's just shared with you the link in the chat box to access Menti. And once you're there, we've got a quick question just to get a sense really of how comfortable you are already on the areas that we're hoping to cover with you today. So I will also share my screen now so that you can see another few ways to join us in Menti as well. So firstly, you can go to menti.com and enter that 8-digit code that you can see at the top of the screen now. And if you'd like to, you can also use that QR code that I will just, so the QR code's not visible at the moment. Let me show that for you. Put that over here. So if anyone wants to use the QR code to join us as well, you can do so. But looking at the scores so far, I see people are probably middle to high confidence. So it's good to know there's some existing knowledge in the room already. Probably feeling most confident about how to take action, maybe less confident about the connection to global markets or how to discuss the topic in particular with others. So that's very useful just for us to understand where everyone's at today. But it does seem like we've got some experience in the room, so do feel free to share in the chat with us as we go along any perspectives that you have from the work that you're already doing on this topic. Great, so thanks so much for getting us started there with Menti. So I would recommend keeping that tab open in the background because we will go back to Menti later in the session. But for now, we're going to dig into our first module on prepare, and for that, I'll hand over to Landon.
Great. Thank you so much, Fiona. So together, we're going to have a look at how gender connects to finance. So we have 3 main sections in each unit, narrowing into the topic a bit more within the unit. And we'll start by looking at what the case for action is. Then we'll narrow in a little bit more and look at market trends. And for this unit, we'll also specifically look at how markets are doing in terms of gender equality progress. In the final section, we will hone in on terminology that will help us communicate about gender equality. But to start, why does gender matter? To get started, it's important to highlight that equality between genders is indeed a human right, and it's also widely documented that women and girls experience adverse impacts of business activities differently and often disproportionately. They also face additional barriers in seeking access to effective remedies. Moreover, because of multiple forms of discrimination, different women and girls may be affected differently by business activities depending on their age, color, class, caste, ethnicity, religion, language, literacy, perhaps where they live, if in a rural location versus urban, access to economic resources, marital status, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, indigenous or minority status. So there's a long list of aspects that can influence how someone is treated. But what that's all to say is this is a very complex and interconnected topic. Now, the document you see on your screen is the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, or UNGPs, which are the global authoritative standards to prevent, mitigate, and remediate business-related adverse human rights impacts. So we have 4 of the principles here. The first is number 14, which indicates that the responsibility of business enterprises to respect human rights applies to all enterprises, regardless of their size, sector, operational context, ownership, and structure. The second principle, Principle 16, encourages businesses to express their commitment to meet their human rights responsibility through a statement of policy that should have certain characteristics. Another principle that we want to highlight is number 20, which highlights that to verify whether adverse human rights impacts are being addressed, businesses should track the effectiveness of their response by using sex-disaggregated data collected in line with a human rights-based approach and outcome indicators developed in consultation with affected people and gender experts. We'll discuss this a bit more in section 2. Finally, Principle 21 particularly highlights the important role of communication, and businesses should be prepared to communicate externally, particularly when concerns are raised by or on behalf of affected stakeholders. What's important to consider from a financial perspective is that in addition to what you may recognize here. Sorry, apologies, I got mixed up in my notes. So moving along, it's important to note that sustainable development depends on equality of genders. You may recognize the image here as the UN SDGs, and gender equality is on its own one of the 17 SDGs agreed to by UN member states, but it also contributes to all other SDGs. The SDGs represent an ambitious attempt to end poverty, protect the planet, and improve the lives and well-being of all humanity. SDG 5 focuses specifically on gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls, but aspects of gender equality appear in the targets and associated indicators of 10 out of the 17 SDGs. And if you'd like to see how gender equality links to the different SDGs, you can have a look at Annex 3 of the SSE guidance on gender equality for exchanges. You might be wondering, what exactly does improving gender equality do for society? Well, first, studies have shown that when we have more equality of genders in society, we also see lower levels of violence, greater economic productivity, and increased resilience against financial and environmental crises. I want to remind you that by gender equality, we don't want to imply more women than men, but equality means that both women and men are represented, have the same level of power, and are both heard and understood equally. However, to achieve equality, in many cases, we need to provide some extra support to the less represented gender, which in many cases today is women. To give you an example of the extent of impact that gender equality currently has on society, a study by the World Bank estimates the loss in human capital wealth due to gender inequality at over $160 trillion. Another study concluded that the equal participation of men and women entrepreneurs could boost global GDP by approximately 3 to 6%. And to read more about this, I recommend clicking on the links in this slide in your handout. Now, in terms of benefits, we know promoting gender equality of both genders has been found to have positive social, environmental, economic, and business benefits. And if we narrow a bit deeper into the benefits that companies can find from enhancing equality in their organization, we can see that companies benefit from higher profitability and financial performance. Different genders have different attitudes towards risk, and we actually see better and more balanced decision making. We also see that the companies that do have better gender diversity are more competitive and innovative. They're better able to attract and retain talent. They're better actually able to attract more funding. As well, companies with more diverse boards and senior management teams demonstrate better ESG performance, as well as more ethical ethical business practices. Now, in terms of the internal impacts of diverse leadership, we can look at one of the many studies on this topic to see a bit more detail about these benefits. This study comes from FP Analytics, and the study looks particularly at industries that are traditionally male-dominated, analyzing around 2,300 publicly listed companies. This study found that companies with more women on their board have on average a higher profit, greater transparency, and higher social ratings. First, we see profitability, and we saw that the companies with the highest percentage of women in management were on average 47% more profitable than those with the lowest, which are consistent with other evidence that we just discussed. Second, in terms of transparency, we see building trust across stakeholder groups, including employees, consumers, regulators, and investors. It's vital in legacy industries that are working to evolve their business models, improve regulatory compliance and performance, and respond to changing needs. So we saw companies with higher percentage of women on boards are more transparent in terms of ESG information. And finally, on CSR, the analysis found a positive correlation between gender diversity on corporate boards and companies' social responsibility performance. In terms of external impacts of diverse leadership, we discussed a few slides ago that diversity and equality can have important societal as well as environmental impacts. And another interesting aspect of this same study was that equality not only had an impact within the company, but also for the environment where it operates. For example, more diverse boards were 39% more likely to reduce emissions and much more water efficient and energy efficient than their peers with less gender diverse boards. In your handout, which we've shared in the chat, you can also find a couple more studies if you want to dive a bit deeper into this. We'll also share in the chat a recent publication that came out from the IFC on gender responsive climate governance and the role of women leaders. I'll turn it back over to Fiona for the next section.
Great, thank you so much, Landon. So now that we've had a look at the case for gender equality, we're going to narrow in a little bit more and have a look at the state of the market. So in the next section, we'll hone in on some of the key terms that we're going to use when we're discussing gender equality. But firstly, let's head back to Menti now to test your knowledge on the current state of the market and how much further we have to go to reach gender equality. So if you follow the link that I'm just posting now in the chat, or if you also have Menti open already, it's the same link as before. The first question is just to get your guess really on how long you think that it will take us to reach gender equality based on the current trajectory. So I'll give you a moment to have a think about that, and I will share my screen so we can look together as well at the results before we show you the correct answer. Okay. So it looks like we've got a range of guesses, but most people so far have guessed maybe somewhere in the 20 to 50-year time frame, I would say. Some outliers who've gone right up the scale, but most people say averaging somewhere under the 100-year mark. So that's interesting. And let's now see what the right answer is. Okay, so the actual answer, as I said, unfortunately, is that it's still a very long time before we'll see gender equality on the current trajectory. 285 years is the figure according to a report by the UN Women, which we'll share with you in the chat box, is that it's going to take that long to achieve gender equality. So I will note that this measurement differs based on how we measure equality. So for example, the latest World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report indicated it might take 130 years to reach a gender equality based on their calculations. So perhaps that's a little bit more optimistic, but overall, we're seeing an indication that ultimately it's not going to be something that's achieved in our lifetime. So clearly a long way for us all still to go on this topic. Okay, so I have another question for you now. And we talked a little bit about this data already, but our first question is just to get a sense of what percentage of CEOs of listed companies in your country do you think are women? So you might be familiar with an American study that went viral, indicating that there are fewer large companies run by women than by men specifically named John. So clearly an indicator that there's still much work to do in the US to achieve gender equality and among the big firms. But of course that varies by region. So it'd be interesting to see what you think the situation is in the Philippines in particular. So I'm seeing so far, most people are going under the 50% mark, certainly, but a lot of people perhaps somewhere between 10 and 20%. And I'll show you the correct answer, and we'll go through all of the data on this in a second. But the correct answer is indeed 8% of CEOs of listed women in the Philippines for listed companies are women. So quite a low level at the moment. And we have the same question for you now relating to board seats. So again, interesting to see what you think the percentage of women who hold seats on listed company boards are in the Philippines. Okay. So similar maybe grouping to before, possibly we've gone a little bit higher, but overall probably averaging somewhere 10 to 20% and somewhere along the scale. So let's just have a look at the answer now. And it's indeed 21%, so a little bit higher than the number of CEOs, more board seats, but still, you know, well below gender parity, that's for sure. So I think hopefully that helps us to see there's a long way to go here. But we've got a bit of data we can dig into now to show you the global picture. So I'll hand back over to Landon, who's going to take us through that.
Great. Thanks so much, Fiona. And for those who haven't seen these publications before, I just shared in the chat our publication from last year, which includes the Philippines. So please go ahead and check that out and download it. So the SSE, in collaboration with IFC, UN Women, and other partners, we work together to provide markets with an overview or benchmark of current progress on gender in leadership of listed companies. And we'll dive into one of those reports now to see how you all did on these Menti questions. So here we have our last year's report, which covered the G20 as well as regional groupings. On your screen now, you can see the first section, which covers the G20, and we'll also share the link to this publication in the chat, as I just did, so you can read it in your own time. And other reports, for example, in 2023, we did an Asia-specific deep dive. So if you're curious more about Southeast Asia or Southern Asia or wherever you'd like, I think we include Central Asia in 2023. You can find those publications on our publication page. And in sum, this data can serve as a benchmark for exchanges and other relevant institutions in their efforts to promote women's full and effective participation in and equal opportunities for corporate leadership positions. Excuse me. So the first table that we see on the screen shows that on average, the percent of boardroom seats held by women in the G20 is about 23%. And you can see that it's an overall positive trend line with a lot of year-over-year positive changes. And if you can't quite see it, the top 5 exchanges in the G20 are in France, United Kingdom, Italy, Australia, and the United States. It's also worth noting, this comes up a lot, given that France leads the leaderboard for G20, France also has a regulatory requirement for women on boards, requiring 40% of board seats to be women. However, even though the percent of women on boards is among the highest in the world, France's female executive leadership pipeline is not quite as strong. So for that reason, in May 2021, the French Parliament voted to introduce gender quotas for executive leadership. The quota is 40% by 2030. So as mentioned, you see a lot improving year over year. And France decreased by 1 point in the last year. But we should note that they're well above what we say is kind of the critical threshold or marker, which is 30%, which we'll discuss a bit more in our sessions. So going from, say, year over year change down to 44 from 45 is not something to be too alarmed about. They're already at quite a healthy percentage as well. So we'll look beyond the G20 and we'll look at some regional data next. So here you can see Europe is leading the way with 37% of board seats held by women, followed by US CanZ, that's Australia, USA, Canada, New Zealand, followed by the African exchanges, and then Southeast Asia, including the Philippines at 21%. After that, there's Latin America and Western Asia as well. So we'll go a bit deeper again and look specifically at your region now. Just give me 1 moment for the slides to load. Okay, great. So here we have data specifically on Southeast Asia. So here we see that Bursa Malaysia is at 29% board seats held by women. I'll note there that we had a discussion with the CEO of Bursa Malaysia, and one thing they noted was, when asked why or how they got to be a leader in the region, they noted that their work on gender equality started 20 years ago. It wasn't an overnight success going from X low percent to 29%. It took them a long time. After Malaysia, you see Singapore exchange with 22%, and you're tied, or the Philippines is tied with Singapore at 22%, followed by Thailand, and then Indonesia at 14%. Next, we're going to ask you to think a bit about what you see as barriers facing your organization or your country to advance gender equality in corporate leadership. So it doesn't have to be a super complex answer. It could just be a few words or a short sentence or even one word. So type in the chat what you think might be a barrier preventing progress to see more women in leadership positions. So first answer come in of culture. Another, okay, the first two answers are identical. 3, culture. Okay, so clearly culture is something we're thinking a lot about. I'll try to keep up with the chat, but misogyny, societal role of women, yeah. Okay, work demands and arrangements. Okay, we'll give you a few more seconds to input an answer. It can be internal barriers within a company or organization. It could be external. Okay, great. These are some really good answers coming through. But we're going to discuss a few of those. So we see, in addition to structural obstacles faced by women in the general workforce, such as unequal regulatory environments, lack of workplace flexibility, and conflicts between work and family obligations, there are specific barriers that also narrow women's leadership paths and cause the drop in representation at the top. And this is really where we get into some of the complexities of this topic. So I highly recommend reviewing these in full in your own time. But in the meantime, we'll go through just a few that weren't mentioned in the chat. So one that didn't come up was the lack of sex disaggregated data and inconsistent reporting practices, which can make it really difficult to measure progress or understand the extent of a gender gap. In turn, that creates a challenge in identifying effective interventions to close that gap. I think someone did mention skills, so lack of training and professional development opportunities is absolutely can be an issue, which can hinder women's attainment of qualifications. I don't think I saw this one come up, but lack of gender-sensitive human capital management for hiring, retention, and promotion processes. You could use diverse hiring committees. You could use gender-blind application processes. Those are just a couple examples of things that you could implement. One discussed and came up a lot was biases and stereotypes, which could suggest women don't have the characteristics needed to lead. I actually just saw in the chat a good answer pop up as well of lack of mentors. So that's another one, lack of access to role models, mentors, coaches, and sponsors. Another really common one, especially in male-dominated industries, is unsuitable work environments. That comes up a lot. That could be issues with even physical spaces, such as lacking women's washrooms on a job site. The one I didn't see come up was safety concerns in operational locations, as well as the risk of gender-based violence and harassment. Gender-based violence or GBV in the workplace and domestic and sexual violence experience beyond the workplace affect employees' well-being and business operations. Such experiences could lead to reduced productivity, increased absenteeism, and higher employee turnover. This can also deter women from pursuing promotions and career development opportunities that are stepping stones to senior leadership. So we'll leave the key barriers there, but suffice to say, there are a lot. And another that just popped up, childcare. Absolutely, Erica. That's a great answer as well. Lack of childcare can be a key barrier for women moving up the corporate ladder. So to increase the number of women leaders and prepare them to take on leadership roles, companies really need to invest in women. This means attending to culture and purpose of their organizations, and it means adopting a more people-focused business model as part of an approach that integrates an ESG orientation into all aspects of operations. If you'd like to dive a bit deeper into this topic, I also recommend reading a recent publication from the IFC on gender-responsive climate governance. This report looks at why we aren't seeing the same level we'd like to see. In other words, what barriers are getting in the way. Some examples of what the report find are a lack of knowledge or training on the topic, a low level of climate and gender lens literacy, and low understanding of the impacts on business. And we'll share a link to the chat, or sorry, a link in the chat about this report, and you can also find it in the PowerPoint handout. But I encourage reviewing these in your own time, especially for all the men on the call. I highly recommend in your own time reviewing some of the slides, such as the key barriers, and having a deep think about, as a man, how you can ensure that some of these barriers are not present in the workplace, or acting as an advocate to reduce some of these barriers and acting as a champion or leader in the workplace to try to support women in the workplace. Because I'll use this as a quick intervention to note that men do have a really important role here in helping advance gender equality, and a big part of that is acting as allies and champions, especially on things like key barriers that their women colleagues or peers are experiencing or facing. But I'll leave that for you to review in your own time. And for now, I'll turn it back over to my colleague, Fiona.
Thanks, Landon. No, very well said, and I think a very good call to action as well. Great. So that moves us on now to the final part of our prepare module, which is all around the language and kind of some of the key terms that we need to have in our minds when we're discussing gender equality. So I'll go through these and then you'll be pleased to know we'll be coming up to our short break at the top of the hour as well. But to get us started on this, we'd just like to get a sense from everyone as to what gender means to you. So in Menti, there's a question for you now, just to let us know, yeah, what's your perspective on what gender is? You know, that can be a word or two, it can be a fully formed definition if you have one, but just to get a sense immediately, what jumps to mind when you think of gender? And then we'll go into some more official definitions from that. Okay, great. Thanks everyone for taking part. So I'm seeing orientation at birth. Some people have said male and female, physical distinction, social construct. So maybe some slightly differing perspectives there. Non-physical identity, cultural expectations, a spectrum. Is it sex or sexual orientation? Empowerment, cultural appropriation, interesting. Socially designated roles, interesting. And then I think overall we're getting quite a range here, I think it's fair to say, of different perspectives on this. But coming out top is kind of identity, orientation, and empowerment, and maybe the social construct side. But possibly a little bit of a discrepancy between those who are sharing words relating to it being a social construct and identity and those who are seeing it as more of a physical attribute. So that's interesting, and I think that's something we'll dive into now with our definitions. But you know, there's really no right or wrong in this sense. It's just to get a sense from you all as to what you think immediately when you talk about this. Great. So as I've said, we'll go now. We've seen those great answers from everyone there. Thank you for sharing. But what we want to make sure for this is that we're all sort of on the same page regarding definitions. So when we kind of start with gender, what we need to be clear on is that this is not simply sex. So it's not just being male or female. And the purpose of this initial exercise is to make sure that everyone understands that gender isn't the same as sex, because gender can differ in different contexts and societies. And this is important because it's not really different sexes that we always need when we speak about the value of diversity. It's actually different ways of thinking, different life experiences or lived experiences, and different institutional restrictions or freedoms. So whilst gender is actually quite a difficult term to define because it means something different to different people, let's briefly get a better idea of what's included in this definition. So UN Women defines gender as the social attributes and opportunities associated with being male and female, and the relationships between women and men, girls and boys, as well as the relationships between women and those between men. So these attributes, opportunities, and relationships are socially constructed, and they're learned through socialization processes. They're context and time specific, and they're changeable. So gender determines what's expected, allowed, and valued in a woman or man in a given context. And in most societies, there are differences and inequalities between women and men in responsibilities assigned, in the activities that they undertake, and their access to and control over resources, as well as their decision-making opportunities. So gender can be seen as part of the broader socio-cultural context. And other important criteria for this context will also include class, race, poverty, ethnic group, and age. So I think as we can see there, gender isn't quite as simple as male or female. It can be influenced and defined based on the nature of certain relationships, based on hierarchies, history, context, and institutions or norms. And most importantly, when we're discussing gender equality today, please remember that we're referring to equality of the genders, not simply, increasing the number of women on boards. Although, of course, as we've introduced already, that is one marker that we can look at to understand where we're at on this topic. So feel free to explore this and other gender equality terms in the Gender Equality Glossary developed by UN Women, which is linked in the slides there, and you can find that in the handout on our webpage, which we shared the link to in the chat, and we'll share it a few more times through the session as well. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper now, and I'm sure you've heard of the acronym DEI, which stands for Diversity, Equity and Inclusion. And increasingly, we're seeing DEI managers or even teams in organizations that are focusing on ensuring an organization's DEI performance. So why not just diversity teams or just equity teams? We'll dig a little bit deeper now into how these concepts connect and interact, and the importance of having all three of these terms as part of the full equation. So firstly, if we start with equity, this is all around ensuring that there's an equitable power distribution among people. So you can think of equity as providing women and men with the same microphone that amplifies their voices to the same extent so that everyone can hear them equally. So you might be thinking, well, isn't that the objective? Well, not quite. It's quite an important part of the picture. But let's say, for example, that an organization has the objective of equity, so equal power distribution, but there are no women in the organization to fairly distribute that power to, or no one to pick up the microphone, as we could say. So, of course, this means we also need to focus on diversity. And diversity is all around ensuring representation. So this is the act of inviting the underrepresented gender to join the board and enhance the diversity of those around the table. So think of diversity as having enough seats at the table. And again, the differences and different lived experiences are important in organizations. So it's not enough just to have the microphones at the table to make sure everyone can speak at the same volume, but also enough chairs so that a diverse group of participants around the table are able to speak. But then if we have just these two, diversity and equity, there's sometimes a risk that we'll have cultural assimilation taking place. So for example, if there are women in the room, they might feel as though they need to act like men to get their voices heard and to make their points. And so we'll still struggle to keep them on around the table, and we won't be benefiting from the diversity that we're aiming to achieve. So, this is where it's also important that we have inclusion. And inclusion refers to the behaviors and practices of making all the members of an organization feel welcomed. So giving them equal opportunities to connect, to belong, grow, and contribute to the organization, and ultimately to feel comfortable and confident being their authentic selves. So to bring it all together, we can say that diversity is being invited into the room, equity is then having the empowerment to speak at the meeting, and inclusion is being listened to within that forum. But of course, this goes much further than meetings or boardrooms, and it should be considered organization-wide, but this is just to give an example. So overall, we can say that our end goal from this is equality, which really depends on all three of those aspects that we've just talked through. So to have meaningful and sustainable equality, we need to balance all of these attributes to make progress. So when we're talking about equality in today's session and remembering the benefits that it brings, it's important just to keep in mind that we're not simply looking for equal numbers of men and women in organizations. What we're really looking for is all three of these things together to bring meaningful diversity, equity, and inclusion. So there's a more detailed version of this diagram also in the slide handout. We have some sort of extra slides sometimes that are hidden in the presentation. So we'd encourage you to take a look at that if you want to understand this concept a little bit better. But otherwise, this is hopefully a good opportunity to take a quick pause. So we're going to take a 5-minute break now, just to give you the opportunity to get a drink or perhaps take a quick stretch. If you have any questions that have come to mind from what we've covered so far, feel free to put those into the Q&A box during the break as well, and we can look to answer those as we move through the session. But for now, I'll start the timer and then we'll reconvene in 5 minutes once the timer's finished. So thanks, everyone.
Okay, welcome back from the break, everyone. Hope you had a chance to stretch or grab a cup of tea or coffee. So now that we have some of the initial concepts clear, let's dive into more of the content and start with how we can enhance an organization's performance on gender equality. The objective of our next unit, Align, is to ensure that your practices align with the global best practices and standards, as well as any local or peer practices that should guide your efforts. Let's begin by looking at the global principles that companies can use to enhance their practices on this topic. And the global standards we're going to discuss today are the UN Women's Empowerment Principles, or WEPs. But before we go into that, we wanted to get a sense of your current familiarity with the WEPs. So let us know, is your organization already a signatory of the WEPs? Yes, no, or maybe you don't know. So if your organization is not already a signatory, we're also going to give you some information about how to become one at the end of this section. Okay, give you a few more seconds for the Zoom poll and then we'll end it. Okay. Well, you see the results there, and unfortunately, there are a lot of WEP signatories globally, but it seems like from this sample group in the Philippines, there's not too many. So that's something we'll learn more about today, and hopefully you can encourage, if you don't have the decision-making ability in your organization, you can encourage whoever is needed to become a signatory of the UN WEPs. So with that, we want to introduce the WEPs with a video, and we're very, wrong slide, and we're very lucky to have with us today an expert on the UN WEPs, as was introduced at the beginning. Tony is joining from UN Women today to help provide an overview of the WEPs and to answer any of your questions about the WEPs. Before she gets started, however, let's play that quick video that introduces the principles.
Think about the impact of a signature. Think about the magnitude of a global movement. Think about the difference you can make and the power of transformative change. By signing the Women's Empowerment Principles, you can galvanize your shareholders and stakeholders to drive change in the workplace, marketplace, and community through a framework of 7 principles. Brought to you by UN Women and UN Global Compact, the Women's Empowerment Principles are a roadmap for business sustainability, innovation, and productivity. Businesses by the thousands and in every sector are becoming part of this world-changing movement to advance gender equality. Businesses that become models for attracting talent, entering new markets, serving their communities, and measurably improving the bottom line. Because gender equality means better business. Don't miss this moment to make a lasting impact on your employees, suppliers, customers, and investors. Join leading companies already on the journey to greater sustainability and growth. Commit to the Women's Empowerment Principles and make today your organization's signature moment.
Okay, great. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tony. Welcome.
Thank you, Landon. Good afternoon, everyone. As Landon mentioned, my name is Tony. I'm a program analyst at UN Women Philippines, and I'm very excited to be part of this training session and to introduce to you the Women's Empowerment Principles, or simply WEPs. I see both WEP signatories and potential signatories, so I hope this session will be a helpful refresher or a learning opportunity for all of you. And as you've seen in the video, we have an ongoing campaign for more businesses to become web signatories. And with the rising importance of reporting and ESG, more companies are realizing the need to focus on gender equality. However, many are unsure how to turn that recognition into action, and that is where the WEPs come in. The WEPs serve as a practical guide to integrating gender equality into business strategy and operations, impacting the workplace, marketplace, and community. The WEPs offer a holistic framework that helps companies advance gender equality while driving positive outcomes for both business and society. The WEPs also provide a roadmap for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly Sustainable Development Goal number 5 or SDG 5, focusing on gender equality. Here you can see the global reach of WEPs, and as of this year, we have reached about more than 11,000. So more than 11,000 companies globally have committed to the WEPs, demonstrating the widespread of the WEPs initiative. On the next slide, we'll show you the 7 principles, and I'll briefly walk through them. Principle number 1 pertains to or focuses on CEO and leadership commitment. It's not just about promoting women in leadership, but ensuring top executives are committed to making gender equality a core strategy. Moving on, principles 2, 3, and 4 focus on the workplace. So principle 2 is about treating all employees fairly without discrimination. Principle 3 is ensuring health, safety, and well-being at work. Principle 4 is about providing education and training for career growth and advancement. It is important to think innovative, and here's an example of that under principle number 2. For example, a bank in Spain noticed men were advancing more quickly because they worked late, while women left early for family responsibilities. To level the playing field, they introduced a policy to close offices at 6 p.m. This helped create equal opportunities for career progression and advancement. Moving on, we have Principle 5. It deals with the marketplace, encouraging companies to promote a diverse supply chain and gender-responsive marketing. At UN Women, we work with companies to adopt gender-responsive procurement as part of a sustainable supply chain. Principle 6 is about community engagement, urging companies to adopt or consult and engage with local women and girls to ensure their initiatives truly benefit them. Finally, we have Principle 7 on measuring and publicly reporting progress. Companies are encouraged to collect data to track their gender equality efforts. Now, becoming a WEP signatory means embarking on a journey toward gender equality. After signing up, companies are expected to engage internal stakeholders, show public commitment, work across their value chains, and report on progress. This is not about quick wins, but about addressing systemic inequalities for lasting change. This slide shows you the steps that companies take after joining or committing to the WEPs, from activating internal stakeholders to sustaining progress through regular data collection and reporting. This may sound a difficult process, but don't worry. At UN Women, we offer over 300 tools and resources to guide companies on how to work on the WEPs. Now, you may ask, how can you become part of the WEPs ecosystem, or how to become a WEP signatory? Your company needs to be a legally registered business. We accept companies from all sectors, sizes, and types of ownership. Stock exchanges are eligible. In fact, there are 35 stock exchanges have already made a commitment to the WEPs, including the Philippine Stock Exchange. Continuing to the application process, you can simply go to our website, www.weps.org, to fill out the online form to apply to become a WEP signatory. Speaking of stock exchanges, the WEPs team is part of the Ring the Bell for Gender Equality organizers, along with SSE, IFC, World Federation of Exchanges, and the UN Global Compact. The Ring the Bell is an event where stock exchanges ring the bell to raise awareness about gender equality around International Women's Day during March. So yeah, we held our ring the bell for this year last March at the PSE Events Hall, and it was a fantastic event. For more information, please visit our website, www.webs.org. And that's all for my side for now. And thank you so much. I'll pass on the floor to our colleagues at SSE. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Tony. That's a really great introduction. And we strongly recommend that all of those looking for a first step on this topic, that you start by working with your leadership to become signatories of the WEPs. And for those that are already WEP signatories, which are more and more every day, we wanted to also flag what you can consider doing next. And this slide here highlights one of the options available, which is the EDGE standard certification. So EDGE provides a certifying service that can help you to take your practices that extra step further, and also provide a communication tool to show the market that you're a leading company on gender equality, in addition to being a WEPs signatory. We'll have a member of the EDGE team joining us as a guest speaker at the next session, so we'll hear more about this then. With that, I'll turn it back over to Fiona.
Great. Thanks very much, Landon and Tony, for that great overview as well. So now that we've looked at a couple of the global initiatives, we're going to look now at what should be considered based on your location. So one of the key factors that should be considered is based on where your company is listed, and as well as where the main operations are, is regulation. So let's discuss what we're seeing from a regulatory perspective. So on this slide, we can see a number of markets where there's some kind of gender quota or requirement set for listed companies, which comes from a previous report produced by the SSE. And on the right-hand side, you can see the current status of gender diversity on the boards of companies in these markets, as well as the percentage of female board chairs and CEOs. Oh, bit of a slip on the slides there. Sorry about that. I think someone might have hit their keyboard by accident. Oh, there we go. Apologies for that. So one question that we often get asked here when we're looking at this data is whether or not quotas or mandatory requirements work, and if this should be implemented in a country. So this is quite a hotly debated topic, and if you'd like to dig into it a little bit deeper, there's some extra slides that we've included in the presentation handout today, which provide some insights from a study conducted by the UNPRI about gender-based quota policies. But as we've seen in the data that we've discussed already today, sometimes this works, having these requirements, and sometimes it doesn't. So why is that? Well, it's not entirely the reason, but a part of this is because it really depends on how much the company implements or how the company implements these quotas. So which actions are taken and how such a rule or regulation might then be interpreted by employees in particular and wider stakeholders. So to have a think about this, we're going to go down to the company level now to see what this means by how we implement it within a company. And so we're going to do a little bit of an exercise just to see how this could play out in practice. So to do this, you got a sneak preview before, but we're going to be discussing two hypothetical companies just to work this through as a bit of a case study. So we'll call one company Peacock PLC and another we'll call Owl Inc. So as you probably guessed, these are made-up companies, but the discussion that we'll have is on their decision-making processes is based on research into real companies. So just to introduce some of the key aspects of this case study. So firstly, we're going to say that both of these companies have only 10% women on their boards and in executive leadership, but both have a parity or about a 50-50% split between the genders at lower level positions. So it's clear already that women aren't getting into the higher level management positions. And they also have one other thing in common. So both organizations have just had a change in leadership and have had a new CEO join. And let's say that both CEOs are expecting new regulation to come in. So they're preparing for a mandatory rule relating to gender equality. And the new CEO at both companies is equally passionate about gender equality, and they want to achieve equality at the top of the companies in their board and their leadership positions. partially so they can be included in a gender equality index, which will give them more exposure to investors that value gender parity. However, this is where the similarities stop, and the companies have taken quite different approaches towards their goals of gender equality and therefore had different results. So we're going to discuss their two different approaches and the actions that they take and see how we think that could play out. So firstly, we'll start with Peacock PLC. So as we said already, they have a new CEO and they've set a bold target of 40% women in leadership positions in 2 years. So to help reach this 40%, the CEO makes a big announcement to staff and she shares her experience in climbing the ladder and uses this example to encourage other women to follow her to the top too. They also set a hiring freeze of any men until the 40% target is reached, unless it's approved by her for extenuating circumstances. So whilst there are some employees who might be feeling excited about this ambition and maybe empowered if it provides them with opportunities for advancement, there are also some mixed feelings. So firstly, some women in the organisation are now scared because they feel as though there's more pressure on them to potentially move up the organisation or to move out if that's not what they want to do. And also some men have job security concerns as well. So overall, the sentiment could be described as being excitement mixed with fear. Now let's look at what their competitor, Owl Inc. does. So as I've said, Owl Inc. also has a new female CEO, and they're also committed to gender equality in leadership positions, but they go about things in a different way. So instead of having the 40% target and setting a hiring freeze to achieve that as Peacock PLC did, Owl Inc., the CEO, decides to join the 30% club. And if you're not familiar with this, the 30% club calls on its members to commit to at least 30% female representation on boards and executive leadership teams, because this is considered to be the critical mass at which minority voices become heard. However, they do want to surpass this 30% and achieve 40% as sort of a top ambition, but they don't set it as a strict quota in the way that Peacock PLC has. So although they want to achieve and surpass the 30%, the CEO isn't really sure of the root causes and is perhaps confused as to why women aren't moving from operational level positions to leadership roles. So to address this, she sets up an internal task force to find out what these root causes are that might be preventing their organisation from enabling women to climb up. And alongside this, the CEO also initiates a reverse mentoring program. So 50% of the workforce is women, but why aren't the leadership learning from them and hearing their experiences already? So something like a reverse mentorship program can really allow leadership to benefit from a more diverse perspective. And at the operational level, it also helps interested staff in progressing their careers as well. Okay, so we've heard a little bit there about some of the different actions that companies could take and perhaps some of the differences here. So we had Peacock, who took the strategy of setting strict targets for 40% and having hiring freezes. And then we see Owl Inc. taking perhaps a slightly different approach where they set a slightly softer ambition, but still aiming to change things. And they create more of a task force and a reverse mentorship program to support this. So we're now going to have a little bit of a think about which strategies we think would work best. So we've got another Menti question, which I'll just move on to now, which will ask you to rank those different activities that we've just heard about there in terms of which you think would be the most and least effective in terms of improving that gender equality at the leadership level. So I'll just ask Landon if you would mind resharing the Menti link again in the chat, just so that everyone has that, and then I'll share my screen so we can discuss your answers as they come through as well. Thanks, Landon. Give everyone a moment to have a think about that, and then we'll see where things end up. Okay, things are moving around a little bit as people are voting. So I'll give us a few more moments. So maybe another 20 seconds or so just to have a think and input your responses before we start discussing them. So feel free to focus on your own screen to make your own ranking before you look at the webinar screen with the results if you'd like to. Okay, great. The responses seem to be slowing a little, and I think the rankings are staying reasonably consistent now. So let's start talking about these results. So firstly, it looks like by priority, we're seeing that creating a gender equality task force has been the top ranked activity. And then second and third place going to the sharing examples of role models at the top and the reverse mentoring program. And then I think most people seem kind of aligned on maybe the least effective thing being the hiring freeze for the overrepresented gender, and some middling views on the setting the 40% target versus joining the 30% club. So yeah, that's all very interesting. So I think we would really say that creating a task force is indeed a really good starting point. And role models, of course, are great and good to see because if we don't have women who have effective role models, this can be difficult. So yeah, I think that can definitely be quite effective. So we've seen kind of a similar ranking there for those 2 points about having a 40% target versus joining the 30% club. But we do have to remember that although 40% is higher, this is a top target, while 30% is a bottom sort of threshold. So they're aiming to surpass this still. So it can depend a little bit on the organizational culture really as to what is the best approach. But of course, as we've maybe talked about with the hiring freeze, we did see that this could be a little bit dangerous since it can demotivate men in an organization without necessarily seeing the whole picture of what's happening. So maybe a few other points to note is that ultimately we need to get to the root causes here. So I think some of these actions here that particularly help to find those root causes, such as the task force and the reverse mentoring program, can be particularly effective in the long run, even if they might take a little bit longer to see results. And I think thinking carefully about the workforce motivation and the cultural impacts of any measure that is implemented is also really important here. And that can be affecting both men and women, as we talked about. So, in particular, men might feel quite demotivated if they feel as though their opportunities for advancement in an organization are limited, but also, you know, for some women as well, that could also create pressure and have some negative impacts. So yeah, I think we would probably agree overall with roughly the ranking of this group here. So let's now go back a little bit into the case study with the two companies and see how that played out for them. So just reshare slide presentation. Okay, so we'll look back now with Peacock PLC. And as a reminder, they were the organization that set the 40% target. They had their CEO share her experience of climbing the ladder, but they also had a hiring freeze as well. And what we saw with Peacock PLC, in this fictitious example, is that they did see some immediate progress after setting the quota. But because they didn't identify the underlying issues that were the root cause, which can have, you know, impact on promoting women. What they really saw was that it demotivated men in the organization because they felt they had less security and opportunity to grow. But also as a result of this, they didn't realize that there were other issues present since they didn't examine the root causes. So even with those efforts, the root causes or barriers still existed. So for example, there were some issues with their workplace culture, the benefit systems they had available, there were some pay gap issues, perhaps unconscious biases, etc. So without getting to the heart of those, they weren't necessarily able to achieve the change they wanted. And also, as a result of the hiring freeze, they found that filling positions sometimes took longer, and sometimes they weren't able to find the right candidate. And external hiring to fill positions was required since their efforts weren't working. So overall, the result that we can say from this is that there was a culture change, perhaps somewhat negatively, in the organization. There was a higher turnover, and thus as a result, there was less innovation and risk taking to achieve new objectives. So whilst the CEO had really good intentions here, because they weren't aware of the root causes of gender inequality in their organization, they couldn't effectively address the issue. And so let's have a look at Owl Inc. and how we think things might have played out there, where Owl Inc., I guess, in their approach, really prioritized identifying root causes through the reverse mentoring scheme, through the gender-based task force. So it's important to know that it's likely that this approach required Owl Inc. to invest more upfront. But very soon, we do think that they would start to see a return on that investment, more so than we can see within Peacock PLC. So Owl Inc. took a much more holistic approach, and they realized that if they wanted to benefit from the changes in their organization's leadership when they managed to achieve gender equality, this would have to not only be accepted by the whole organization, but also they would need to tackle the specific issues within the organization that caused the lack of diversity to begin with. So by creating a task force as well as implementing a reverse mentoring program, Owl Inc. was able to identify not only the specific barriers that came from inflexible working arrangements, biased benefits, or a lack of support for women to be able to succeed, they were also able to change the leadership culture. So through the mentorship program, this really opened their eyes to the value of diversity in decision-making progress. So as a result, the company saw increased innovation since diversity was leading to more pushback of ideas, and it also pushed leaders to think of new and innovative solutions. So since they ended up saving resources associated with having better staff retention and not needing to hire new staff, they could also continue to train and educate staff members to further enhance the culture within the organization that they were looking for. So, of course, a fictitious example, but I hope that you will agree that it seems likely that this might be how things would play out, and that because Owl Inc. really prioritized understanding root causes rather than just setting targets without necessarily doing that, they were able to see much greater benefits in the long run and much greater success. So I think going back to that question we talked about at the start about regulations for quotas and how important corporate culture is in the success of these, we're really seeing there that if you choose to set a quota and the corporate culture and potential deeper issues haven't been addressed, then there may still be a lot of issues for an organization. So on that note, regarding corporate culture, we won't go through this in detail today, but I do recommend that you review this slide here. It's a useful slide that gives you just a list of some of the actions that you can take to make sure you're identifying the root cause and hopefully not making those same mistakes as Peacock PLC. So really thinking about getting to the heart of what your recruitment practices are, what your organization's policies are, both for your own workforce and for your supply chain as well. And thinking maybe about how you can do a gap analysis or audit to get to the heart of these things. And also really thinking about, your leadership communications and that you're setting the right tone. So we'll go into some of this a little bit more with Tony in part 2 in terms of other aspects of the WEPs that can be employed here. But hopefully just a few primers to start thinking about how you could better tackle these issues. So to wrap up this section, we're going to just do a quick poll now and thinking about, how do these actions really connect to financial performance? So I'll launch the poll now. And so the question here is thinking about some of those different activities we've talked about there. Which do you think are most important for helping a company to improve its financial performance as a result of gender equality? So is that implementing policies? Is it maybe creating all women boards, collecting gender disaggregated data, only promoting women until you reach parity, or setting gender-based targets? So take a moment and have a think which ones you think would be most effective there and most connected to improving financial performance. Okay. See lots of people voting, but I'll give us another few seconds just to put your responses in before I close the poll, which I'll just do now, and then I'll share those results with you. So overall, it looks like most people certainly thought the top answer, and then people also selected options 3 and 5. So policies, disaggregated data, and setting gender-based target. And indeed, that is the correct answer. We would say that all 3 of those are important. But what we'd want to emphasize here is that it's important to have all 3 of them together and not just one of them. So for example, if you have just gender-based targets, but you don't have the policies to ensure that women are supported to stay in leadership roles, and the data isn't collected to better understand maybe why less women apply for positions of leadership, then you're going to potentially be missing the root causes of the problem and will constantly struggle to reach equality. So again, it's just that point that without equity and really understanding the root cause of these issues and giving that microphone to everyone, you won't have sustained equality. So thinking about all 3 of those things together. And indeed, as we've seen in those case studies, maybe actions that focus on only women and only promoting women can be quite tricky because they will potentially have negative consequences. So we'd recommend really taking that other approach of thinking more holistically in these areas. All right, thanks everyone. So just to wrap up on this section really, so we've looked there at the global and the local levels, and we're now going to focus in a little bit more on the level of companies and look at some of the peer practices to stay ahead. So to kick us off here, I'll be handing back over to Tony at UN Women, who's going to add a little bit of colour to this discussion with a few examples. So thanks again, Tony, and over to you.
Thank you, Fiona. So for this slide, we'll provide you some examples on how companies are implementing the WEPs and those who have decided to work on specifically workplace issues. So first, I would like to provide you some examples from South Africa. So a management company located in South Africa implemented a strategy to increase women's representation to 40% across all senior levels of the organization. To achieve this, they launched a women's leadership development program to enhance the recruitment of women. With this clear goal and action plan, the company exceeded its target, reaching 41%, near to their target, of women in senior level positions. Another example is a bank in Sweden that tackled the gender pay gap for its 16,000 employees in 4 countries in which they operate. So that's Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Sweden. The bank put in place a job evaluation system and kept it updated regularly. This was critical to understanding what makes roles comparable to others and how equal pay can be measured. They also followed up with close monitoring and reporting of the program and produced reports on a regular basis. There are some other examples on marketplace issues. So first, an example of which is a platform in the United States or US aimed to increase lending to women entrepreneurs, particularly those from small businesses, to enhance their economic resilience and independence. To achieve this, they established a dedicated fund focused on improving access to capital for women-owned businesses and reducing their cost of borrowing. As a result, they committed to ensuring that approximately 40% of their annual capital allocation would be directed toward women-owned businesses. There are also companies that have participated in the WEPS Business Accelerator to support their WEPS journey with UN Women's support. On the next slide, we'll show you some of the resources that we currently have for WEP signatories. We have some great tools for you to access, like the Gender Action Plan module, which we will dig deeper in the next session. We also have the Gender Responsive Recruitment Checklist and the Gender Responsive Procurement Tool. And becoming a WEP signatory is about much more than just signing up and committing. It's about making a real, lasting commitment to gender equality in your business practices and contributing to a more inclusive economy, or future-proofing your business as well. Whether through leadership development, equal pay, or supporting women entrepreneurs, the WEPs provide a clear path for driving progress and creating more meaningful change. And we invite you to join this global initiative toward gender equality. And we look forward to receiving more applications from Philippine business entities and companies soon. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing your impact in that your companies will make. I'll hand over to Fiona to continue this conversation. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Tony. Much appreciated. And I think there's some great tools to get started with, and we'll obviously dig into that a bit more on Friday's session as well. Okay, excellent. So that's been super helpful. So our next segment now will be a guest speaker joining us from Bloomberg to talk a little bit more about this in the context of how investment and finance are using some of this information on corporates in their assessment. I'm told that our guest speaker may be different than advertised, so apologies for that. But I think we're to be joined by Eureka, if I understand, from Bloomberg. So I'll just skip past my intro slide for Harry. Apologies, Eureka. We'll rename your account so that it's showing correctly that this is you. But I'll stop sharing from our end, and I believe you should have access to share screens. But great to have you with us, and thanks again for joining.
Yes, thank you very much. One moment. Let me see. Are you able to see my screen?
We do, yes, that's all good.
Okay, perfect. One moment. Sorry, give me 1 second.
No problem.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me, everyone. My name is Eureka, and I look over the Bloomberg Gender Equality product from the APAC region at Bloomberg. And today I will walk you through to briefly introduce about the gender equality scores, or GE scores for short, how Bloomberg scores gender, and with a short training exercise to show how data can challenge initial perceptions. So just to get this started, let me give you a brief background on the gender equality scores, or GE scores for short. GE scores is a globally standardized reporting method designed to acquire workplace gender data. And each metric within the GE scores is clearly defined to ensure consistency and comparability across different markets and industries. The metric used to assess gender equality have been carefully selected through a combination of research and internal review. And most importantly, the gender-related data is scraped from companies' public filings. So corporates are strongly encouraged to disclose this information to promote transparency. So diving into the GE scores taxonomy, it is broken down into 3 main issues, including leadership, talent pipeline, equal pay, and inclusive culture. These are further split into sub-issues, which are constructed of similar types of data fields as you see listed here. The scoring framework itself is structured hierarchically, where the scores are built of individual fields at the bottom, which are grouped into sub-issues, and which are further aggregated into broader issues to give you the overall gender equality score. Each component is evaluated on a scale from 0 to 10, with 10 representing the highest level of performance. I'd like to now introduce a few offerings Bloomberg provides to companies, especially to ones that do not have access to our Bloomberg terminal. To ensure corporates can learn, view, and challenge the Bloomberg ESG scores and associated data points we capture for it, Bloomberg has launched the ESG Corporate Web Portal. Any company under our Bloomberg scoring universe can make an institutional account for free at the link on the right bottom, as you see on the slide. And upon logging in, corporates can gain a better understanding of the Bloomberg ESG scores, review what ESG data has been collected from companies' public filings, challenge any data points by submitting the correct value with the public report, which will be reviewed by the Bloomberg data team here. Currently, this portal only supports our Bloomberg ESG scores. although we are considering to onboard the GE scores to the portal soon, in the meantime, corporates can request for a Bloomberg Equality Scores Materiality Framework, which is something like this. This materiality framework will have the granular information on the GE scores and all the input data we have captured by fiscal year. To receive this document, please request from the esgcorporate@bloomberg.net email address. And upon receiving this document, companies can review their score, challenge any input data point via email to this email address below. So now I'd like to shift gears a little bit and go over a simple case study together to give you a better understanding or an idea of what all of this means and investigate how data can challenge initial perceptions. So here we will analyze two companies, Louis Vuitton on the left, a high luxury fashion brand, and Nike, shown on the right, a popular sportswear brand. So firstly, I'd just like you to think about the company's high-level social factors at play and any biases you may have. For example, which company may be more advanced on their gender equality journey, which may have more policies or initiatives to promote equality in the workplace. So if we look into this deeper with the Bloomberg data, looking beyond the perceptions to see how data can drive your decision making, we will see here the breakdown between company A and company B for their gender equality scores or G scores. So at first glance, we see company B has a higher G score of 8.3. Looking further into the issue level, we see company B has a much higher leadership score, largely because of the executive section, which we see at the bottom here, where company B really stands out with a 9 compared to the 1.2 of company A. And some interesting underlying data points that we pulled that you see at the bottom here also shows that company A has a slightly more women on board and committees chaired, however, falls a little bit behind on executives. Whereas company B is a bit more constant throughout all of the three and does better on the consistency element, which we see plays a effect onto their overall score. Now looking at a different issue, so the talent pipeline issue, we can see the underlying scores all here. We see for company B, it's at parity, while company A is a little above parity. However, if we look at the overall score, company B is doing better or higher, scored higher than company A. This is mostly due to company A, as you see in red, they have been flagged for not disclosing some values, whereas we can see for company B, they have disclosed all of the data points, which had an impact into their overall score as well. And lastly, the equal pay and inclusive culture score, or in other words, the benefits available in that company. Again, for the overall score, we see company A is performing lower than company B. So for this score itself, most of these data points are binary, which means it is a yes or no data point, where 10 would mean that they have the policy in place and 0 would be that they don't. And for example, if we look at the bottom here for anti-sexual harassment training, we see company B has this in place while company A does not, as well as for backup family care services, we see company B has this where company A has not. And this also plays into the final scoring where company B performed higher. So now I'd like to do a quick poll to see and see if you can answer if you think company A, which had a lower gender equality score, is either 1 Louis Vuitton or 2 Nike.
Apologies, Eureka. I think we have the wrong old company in our poll of Under Armour, but please use the
Yeah.
second option, Nike. Use Under Armour if you want to vote for that one. Sorry for that, everyone.
Yes. Thank you. Give it a little bit more time. All right. This is really interesting. Thank you very much for the for voting. I see that majority thinks the company A with the lower gender equality score is Louis Vuitton. However, company A, yeah. So yeah, this is your answer was correct. But the overall purpose of this was not to see if you get the score and the company correct, but try to give you that the overall purpose was to hopefully challenge some of your initial perceptions and to give insight on what data investors are looking at to make decisions. So even if a company is performing well in one area, it doesn't always necessarily mean that they're completely well advanced in gender inclusivity specifically. So to end this portion, I'd like to conclude with a powerful quote. You can't manage what you don't measure. This highlights the importance of more data transparency can help analyze and make improvements in the company's gender equality space by being face-to-face with the data. So yeah, hopefully you found that interesting. And if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch to reach out to me or my team. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Eureka, for that excellent example. I think really bringing to life, how this information is being used and how we can start to see the differences playing out between companies. So much appreciated. Excellent. And apologies, everyone, for that slight error in the poll there on our side. We'll be sure to update that for future, but thanks for bearing with us. Great. So to wrap up the session, as we're coming towards the end of it, we also want to make you think about how you can put into practice what you've learned so far today. So with this in mind, we have a final kind of Menti question here that asks you to name an activity that you plan to initiate in your organization that could help you to improve gender equality. So we say 3 here. If you don't have 3 actions yet, that's fine. Just feel free to share one. But really, from what's coming out today so far, what's front of mind for you as something that you could take forward in your own organization? So Landon's shared the link again, and I see some people have already given us their options, and let's just have a quick look together at your thoughts on this. Great. So someone has mentioned maybe having a seminar on gender equality to have everyone on the same page. Yeah, a great idea, I think. So being fair and just in women in the organizations, giving them the opportunities to improve their skills, signing up to the WEPs, excellent. I'm sure Tony will be pleased to hear that takeaway. We have also maybe initiating activity to develop policy on gender equality. Yeah, exactly. If that's not something you have already in place, having an initial policy can be very helpful. And I think some of the tools that we'll be discussing relating to the WEPs sort of action planning area should hopefully support you there. And we also have signing up again and joining the WEPs, maybe looking at an innovation project, mentoring, maybe training awareness to your leadership. Yeah, exactly. Making sure that all your leaders are also clear, not just on the state of play, maybe sharing some of that data about the situation, but, really trying to compel them to think about the business benefits as well of doing this. It's not just a nice to have, but a business imperative really to improve gender equality. And I hope the information we've shared with you today can help you to make that case. Great, lots of great ideas here. So I also see maybe looking at disaggregating data. Yeah, exactly. So starting to dig into your data and understand that breakdown so that you can see what's really happening at the moment. So maybe raising awareness, thinking about training again, team building. Yeah, great. The reverse mentoring scheme. Excuse me. maybe establishing a committee. Yeah, that's a great idea. Gathering, you know, a group of stakeholders from different parts of the business who can help to think about this in a joined up way. Thinking about unconscious bias and anti-harassment training for all employees. Yes, I know that's something many organizations are doing, and you know, such an important part of the recruitment process to have those principles set out as well. Maybe auditing to pinpoint the problems. And someone here is saying as well that they maybe have already started on gender equality, but it's the implementation that's the challenge. Yes, so it's one thing to have policies and have goals, but to make sure that they're actually being implemented. So building out your tools, as you say, to support you in that, and continuing to train colleagues in their role on these policies. Great. And thinking maybe about if targets are appropriate for your organization, whether they'd be helpful. Great. This is lovely to see lots of tangible actions that everyone can take away here. So that's great to see. Don't worry, we don't expect you to have achieved these things by Friday, of course, for part 2, but hopefully helpful to reflect after this first session on what's front of mind for you. So thinking again about corporate culture has been mentioned. Maybe supporting other women-led businesses and partnering with NGOs sounds like a great idea. Thinking about, you know, campaigns to raise awareness. So some people saying that they might have quotas, which is interesting. So as we say, just making sure that if you do implement quotas, that those are implemented alongside actions to understand the root causes and to promote the culture change needed to support those quotas is really important as well. Fantastic, though. Thanks, everyone, for sharing those thoughts. So one final Menti question for you now, which is just to revisit those learning objectives that we set ourselves, or focus areas for the session at the start of the training, around building your knowledge of gender equality in global markets, being able to explain and discuss this topic with others, and thinking about how to take action to improve gender equality. So we're hoping that you'll be feeling a little bit more confident now in these areas. So we'll just give everyone a second to let us know where they're at. But looks like those who've responded so far are certainly feeling more comfortable, and we're seeing a movement up the scale there. So that's fantastic to see that is improving. So that's great. Good. So with that, I'll just return a couple more slides before we close off the session for today, just to wrap things up and to recap on where we'll be going for our next session on Friday. So firstly, it's just to mention that there's a lot to do in these training sessions. We know it's a lot of your time to take. So we're really appreciative of the interaction that you give us. So we have one more session together on Friday. And so if you join us for our part 2 session on Friday as well and take part in the full training, you'll be able to get your certificate for participating. So we'll share with you a link at the end of Friday's training to show you how to do that. But basically, it'll involve filling out a feedback survey, and then you'll get sent your certificate. So just to mention that will be coming for you as part of the part 2 session. But just to round off things today, and I see we had a question there about re-registering. So there's no need to re-register. If you joined and registered for today's training, you should have received an email from Zoom, which includes a diary invite for both today and Friday, but it will be the same link to join us again on Friday. So thanks for checking that point. One registration for both trainings. But just to share the contact details as well for all organisations, if you'd like to follow up with us to discuss anything about what you've done, you can find these details in the slide handout as well, available from the event webpage. And on that page, we also have the guest speaker slides for today's session and our 2 guest speakers who'll join us from the Edge Foundation and from the Luxembourg Stock Exchange on Friday as well. So you'll find their slides on our website as well. But all that remains today is just to say, oh, sorry, I skipped past that one, but just to say a big thank you to Eureka for joining us from Bloomberg to cover off that great segment on their work around gender scoring and indices. And before we close, a few final words of appreciation, firstly to the SSE official supporters, a group of stock exchanges and other organisations who are really promoting and advancing sustainable capital markets and making our training work possible. And a final thank you again to our partners on this training programme, so the IFC, Columbia University, UN Women, and especially Tony for joining us today to present on behalf of UN Women and the government of Luxembourg as well. And finally, a big thank you as well to our hosts at the Philippine Stock Exchange and Mr. Monzon for joining us to open today's session. And lastly, of course, thank you all to you for joining us today and taking the time to participate in the session. So have a great rest of the day, everyone, and we'll look forward to seeing you for our next session later in the week to continue the training together. So we'll close the session there, and thanks again.